Riley, who is a dynamic coach dedicated to empowering the person behind the business. She has a rich background as a salon owner for 12 years and has over 20 years experience as a barber and stylist. Kelly has now pivoted to coaching and speaking. Her journey equips her with a unique perspective on guiding entrepreneurs to unlock their full potential to achieve authentic success. Welcome, Kelly, to the Stay on Course podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm excited. Let's get going.
Well, Kelly, before we get started, I ask all of my ingredients. I ask all of my guests before we get started, what is your favorite food?
My favorite food since childhood has been fettuccine Alfredo. I would eat that dish and lick the plate of the sauce all the time and go back for more and then lick the plate. Like it's my favorite.
Fettuccine Alfredo. I'm a big pasta fan. Love Italian food. How about you, Neil?
Oh, I love it. And I get it gluten-free as my girlfriend will cook it gluten-free for me. Cause I eat I don't have an allergy. I just found out gluten-free, everything is the best way for health. That's my big thing.
That's amazing. Well, Kelly, let's get started. We're talking about ingredients for success for entrepreneurs and even corporate executives, giving themselves the permission to pivot. Tell us some of the ingredients for success for people on that journey.
So I would say, and this is me speaking from my own experience, but I would say that acceptance is the first thing. You really have to let yourself off the hook. You have to accept that where you are right now is maybe not where you want to be, and you want to be doing something else. And if you can just accept that you want to do something different. You want to be somewhere else. Let yourself off the hook for it. You don't have to go down with the ship. I think that is kind of the very first thing. The second thing you got to do is really give yourself.
Let's stop there for a second. I want to stop there because I think that this one is so critical. It warrants a few seconds here, right, Neil? Because when people are in business, right, and they bring up this extension of themselves, let's call it like almost like their child, right? And they realize that this thing is not working and they have to give it up. That's a big thing to accept, Neil. What do you think?
Oh, no doubt. I mean, to give up something, we don't want to quit, right? And when we decide that we're going to or shift, it's hard for us because we think then, what was the purpose of ever doing it? And then you beat yourself up about it, but you can't, because if you go ahead and beat yourself up about it, then you're going to attract more of those things again. So you have to really understand everything is a learning experience, move forward. But I make those same mistakes still all the time, but then I kind of refocus and say, okay, what's next? And we at times have to say goodbye. We can't always think we're going to make it through what we're doing. We're always going to find something different that's going to be a little bit better.
And I think the acceptance, Kelly, is that really leaning into what we learned from the experience. Because at the end of the day, you learned something, even though it may have been a really difficult thing to step away from. You've learned something and you've become somebody as a result of that journey. And so to accept that you have to walk away, knowing that you learned something, knowing that you became somebody better, helps that, right?
Absolutely. I think that's one of my biggest takeaways from the whole thing is I really felt for myself that giving up my baby, I have two children, but this was my third child, right? And when anything else in my life was going like anything else was hitting the fan, the one thing that was always constant for me was always my business. So to have to accept that my business wasn't going the way that I wanted it to go anymore, or that this is not where I wanted to be anymore, that is such a huge, huge, huge thing to, like, a huge process to go through. The letting go, the accepting, the deciding that this just isn't it for me anymore. But I also, just like you said, like, you learn so much. You can't say that in the 5, 10, 12, 20 years that you've been in that business, you're the exact same person who walked in. I walked in at 26, 27 in my business. I left it at 40, right? So I've grown on so many different levels, but now I get to take all of that stuff and put it into my next business and make sure not to do some of the same mistakes that I had before, you know, and different mindsets going into my next journey.
Amazing. Tell us the next ingredient.
So the next one is giving yourself grace. So I feel like this here goes hand in hand with the acceptance. Like, you have to give yourself grace because you have made this decision and you've decided that this isn't it for you anymore. It doesn't mean that you're a failure. It doesn't mean that your business was a failure. It just means that you're ready to do something else. You've learned and extracted everything that you could from this experience, and now it's time to go on somewhere else.
I like that. Giving yourself grace and really leaning into that it's okay to do this. I think if you've taken it as far as you can, you know,
Yep. I
if
mean,
you,
yeah.
right?
I mean, that's the hard part of giving up something, even if you don't love it and you're saying it just didn't work out. And a lot of times we care about what other people think, you know, well, what happened to this deal? Like, for example, you know, my wrestling comeback, I'm kind of might be putting it on back burner. I don't know, but I could care less what people think. If I'm not going to jump in the pro wrestling back in the ring because I looked at all the options, even though I love it, and say, hey, it's just not going to be the right thing. You got to make that decision. You got to give yourself grace that you made that decision and move on. Because if we overthink ourselves, always, maybe I shouldn't have done that. That's not good, because our next thought is going to be where our reality is going next in our lives.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also think that you really can keep yourself stuck if you're not giving yourself grace, right? Like, if you overthink it, and I do feel as though I did this to myself. I've been wanting to make my pivot for a while. It's been that kind of sneaking suspicion in the back of my mind for a while. But yeah, it's just giving yourself grace to go and to move on to the next thing and being okay with that.
Yep.
Which transitions nicely into your next ingredient.
Yeah. So I like to say, like, the most important thing really is to just focus on the next step, right? I think and again, from experience, small business owners are such forward future thinkers. Like, we need to have all of the steps planned out from beginning to end. You got to have the whole vision. And again, if you are trying to plan the whole thing, you are going to keep yourself stuck where you are because you're overthinking it. There's too much to do. Just focus on the next step. What can I do now that's going to put me, you know, in alignment with where I want to go? And everything else you'll figure out the next steps as you go. Don't try and do everything and figure it out right now.
Exactly. I love that. Yeah, because otherwise it can become so overwhelming that you just stop doing anything and you just do the Netflix thing. Did you ever do that? It's just like, I'm gonna Netflix today.
Oh
Yeah.
man, I don't know. Okay. So I will give my feedback. I agree with you. The way I would look at it is short-term goals. Your long-term goals are probably going to be a little different than you expected. You have to let it just happen and develop, and really focus on the short term, not the long term. Long term, you have to have long-term goals, but we overthink. We got to have all these things and all these ducks in a row lined up in place before we run. No, we have to crawl, walk, then run, and we can go through it and be productive. A lot of times people say, I got to have this set up, then I can go.
Yeah.
No, you're going to miss out and I think that's the mistake people make.
Yeah, absolutely. I found for me when I was going through this process, after, accepting and making the decision and just letting myself be in that space, giving myself grace that this is not where I wanted to be anymore. I just needed to figure out, like, I don't need to know what my whole life is going to look like. What do I do? How am I getting out of this right now? That's the first
Right.
thing to figure out. How do I get out of here? And once I get out of here, what am I going to do? And so it was just figuring out, like, giving myself space, I'm going to say, if I could get out of what I'm doing and figure out that one next place that I'm going to be, then it just opens up my time, my energy, my mind, everything to start putting all the rest of the puzzle pieces together so that I could figure out the rest of my life. But if I'm trying to do that from a place where I'm stressed out and trying to devise a whole plan while you're trying to get out of something else, like it's just not going to come together the way that you want it to.
Amazing. Kelly, thank you so much for sharing your ingredients for success, giving yourself permission to pivot. We talked about acceptance, giving yourself grace, and focusing on the next step. Tell us, Kelly, where can our audience find out more about you?
You can follow me on Instagram. That's where I show up the most right now. So that's at Coach Kelly on Instagram, and also on Facebook. You can find me there under Coach Kelly Riley. Or if you want to email me, kelly@kellyriley.ca.
Amazing. Thanks, Coach Kelly, for being on the Stay on Course podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a ton of fun.
All right. That was a special simulcast Neil Haley Show on the